everybody, and welcome back to Play.Hype.Dialogue. Today we are diving under the sea. I'm not doing that.
Can this please be our intro? Please, I'm begging you.
So then we are diving under the sea. Oh my God.
I'm not
Oh, Carlos, that was gold.
That is a perfect intro.
So that was a choice that was made.
I love that. That is good.
Oh my God. Woo!
So welcome to the show. This is Play.Hype.Dialogue. Today we are diving into the sea to talk about Disney and Pixar's Luca. This is a 2021 film that was released directly to Disney Plus for streaming. How did we enjoy the film? What are our initial thoughts before we jump into the conversation?
This was the most visually beautiful film of all time. Not of all time, but no, it was honestly so beautiful. And I'm a ocean sea person, so I was just like, oh, this is giving me everything I need. So I love that. The story was great. I have to say the visuals for me were the most important, like the best part of it.
Yeah, I hated it. Just kidding. I love
it. You can't see, but our faces were so what?
The thing is, like, we don't prep that much before. Yeah, we really don't know.
Yeah. No, so I did love it. Actually, the first time I watched it was a couple months ago or a while ago when it first kind of came out, and you two were both talking about how much you loved it. And the first time I watched it, I think I had maybe a little bit too much positive anticipation. So I was like, okay, I liked it. I don't know about loved it. But I did watch it again in preparation for this episode, and I loved it. So the tables have turned. I did visually think it was really beautiful. And by the way, Omar, I also watched the director's previous short. Not the one that went with, not Ciao Alberto, the other one. He has one called La Luna, which was also visually really beautiful. So
what's it called?
If you're in La Luna, it's like a 6-minute short.
I'm gonna watch
it was really visually beautiful as well. So I was into it, and I'm excited to talk about it with you guys.
Yeah, as am I. This is one of those movies I sort of stumbled on by accident. We were and still are in the midst of a pandemic as we are recording, if you were listening when this first drops. And so I was like, let me watch all the things since I got a password for Disney Plus. So I put it on and I was like, this movie is beautiful. And I cried. And then I watched it again and I sobbed because I am very emotional and in touch with my emotions. So let's jump in, or let's dive in to further discussion about Luca.
Wait, I want to comment on the crying piece just because when I watched it, it was this morning and it was right before I had a meeting, and it ended just like 30 seconds before I had to jump into a department meeting. And I was just like choked up, like trying to pull it together, jumping into this meeting. So I definitely feel you on the crying piece.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think so in our last episode, we talked about Disney's Encanto and how it touches on a lot of these really deep issues, talking about trauma. And we sort of brought up Luca in our discussion in that episode, sort of as a sort of similarly subtextually rich story. And I was like, why don't we do an episode on Luca? That would be dope. And so here we are. And I think the emotional piece is really important because I think this film, like it did for me, it's done for other people, has really struck that emotional chord. So if you care to share, what was the piece that really struck that emotional chord for you in this rewatch?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think, so we were talking, so for one thing, I think the characters' relationships are really touching from top to bottom. And I know we're going to spend most of the episode on that, I would imagine. Especially the relationship between Luca and Alberto. I was into the underdog theme. I was more into Julia than I had been the first watch. So I did feel like she was a great character at the end of the day. And I was paying more attention to the way that that region of Italy was portrayed. And I think there were touching aspects to it that resonated. So the first time I watched it, I would say I felt like it was a little bit thin, like a little bit, it's just like a little over the top. I was like, oh, it's like a Vespa and the gelato. It's just like, I'm like, yes, you know, I felt like they were doing a lot, and they were like Scopa, which is a game, and it was just, I felt like it was a little thin on the ice in terms of the way that it was portrayed. But the second time I felt more appreciative of it. I did notice more in the background that I thought was really beautifully done. And I really felt like I connected. I enjoyed the father character.
Yeah.
Not like to say that he would be like my favorite character, because I know we're supposed to talk about favorite characters, but I enjoyed him the first time and I enjoyed him as well the second time, and it was really sweet. So
how about you, Omar? Any moments that brought a tear to your eye?
No, it was a sweet movie, but I don't remember. Also, I'm partly through the rewatch now, but then I had to get off to jump on this, dive in this episode. But I don't. I just remember being like in awe, like when they were like, you know, jumping through the waves, and I don't know, like when they first got airborne with the broken down Vespa that they were building. Like, I just remember feeling those moments of like joy, and none I can remember that made me weep or anything. Like not like Encanto, so where I had to like hold it together during the dos Oruguitas song, but
Yeah.
right, yeah, that moment. Woo. But in terms of a specific moment, I think the second time that Alberto gets like revealed to people as a sea monster, and then when Luca goes out into the rain to be with him, because he played him earlier in the film, which pissed me off a lot. That I had forgotten about that. I was pissed. I was like, wow, like that was trash.
I was like, you're only here because of him, you dick. Like, get it together.
Yeah, no, that was definitely a tough moment. So when I first watched it, I started to pick up on the queer subtext right away, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that first moment when he's like, oh, do you think they would allow sea monsters in your school? I'm like, he better not. Like, he's going to out Luca to Julia. Like, he's going to splash him or throw him in the water, and it's going to be this traumatic, horrible scene. And it isn't. But then Luca's reaction to when Alberto outs himself as a sea monster, I'm like, like
cold-blooded. He's just like, sea monster.
My heart broke into a billion pieces.
At two Luca.
But then the scene at the end, or towards the end, where he redeems himself by racing into the rain, grabbing Alberto, and then going down, and spoiler alert, they win the race, was just so touching, so beautiful. But the moment that always hits me in my feels and starts the tears to flow in is the end scene, when Alberto hugs Luca and is like, you got me off the island. And then they hold hands as the train parts. And I'm like,
that was kind of like, not crying, but that was like, oh, like friendship.
Hits me in the feels every single time. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be fine this time. Nope. Started getting teary-eyed this morning as well, to do my episode prep rewatch. So we've talked a bit about some of the characters. The main story centers on Luca and Alberto, and then they meet Julia and become fast friends. They become the underdogs. But there are also some interesting tertiary characters that fill out this world. So did anyone have a favorite character they identified with, a character they wanted more from or wanted to see more of?
Machiavelli the cat. I am not even joking. That is my favorite character. I don't know. I just love the looks that he gives. I love the sounds that he makes. I just, every time he came on screen, I was overflowing with joy. Like that was, I don't know, like that. I just love that character. in terms of identifying with anyone, maybe not particularly anyone from like maybe the entire town, that just because I want to live there, but also I want to live under the sea. Like I just want to be like one that can like I want to be one of the sea monsters and just like have an apartment in town and have my cave under the water, and super deep, I know, but
Deep like the ocean. But
but
thank you. I'll be here all week. What about you, Mela?
I'm not sure. So I think of the main characters, I don't know. I do think there's something to identify with Luca's journey itself, as first being very fearful person, very fearful kid, and then embracing risk and embracing adventure and embracing certain types of friendship. So I think that was really beautiful. I do think the main event, or I do think the most compelling thing about the movie is that relationship between Luca and Alberto. And I mean, of course, I like Julia as, you know, like queen of the weirdos, you know. I just like it. And on this second watch, when she's talking about the kid that always wins the race, and she's like Ercole, and she's like, down with the like evil empire of repression or something. I don't remember the line that she says it like 2 or 3 times, and that was pretty hilarious. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fact that she just like welcomes these two. She identifies her fellow weirdos and just welcomes them straight up into her home. No questions asked. So I appreciated that. I want to give a shout out to a tertiary character that I don't know whether this character gets a lot of love, and that would have to be the Luca's grandmother.
Grandma.
First, she covers for him, which is a boss move. Early in the movie, when she pretends that she sent him out, and second, just at the end when they're eating in the yard, and the Luca's mother is like, "Ma, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "I come up here on the weekends." So she was a fun tertiary character. I enjoyed.
wasn't she also the one that said like there are going to be people that like him or don't like him, he's got to figure out who they are? It's a much better quote than I'm remembering, but
yeah, no, she's the one who says it, because the mom's like, oh, can we really like trust that he'll be okay out here? And it's like, he seems to be able to find the good ones, the people who are going to understand him. I'm butchering it too. I'll see if I can pull it up, but yeah, no, Julia's evil empire of injustice trying to take down Ercole, and then the grandma's line is just amazing.
So what about you?
So for me, I really loved Luca. Obviously, I know basic, just his journey being sort of, he's not as anxious as other Disney characters that we've talked about, like with our Encanto episode, or talked about in other sort of media, like literally fear from Inside Out. But there's a certain level of anxiety in exploring something new, in reaching out to the surface, and keeping your interests a secret, having his little cave where he stashes the alarm clock that he found in the playing cards, but then also like taking a risk on a new friendship to put himself out there and finally finding someone to sort of unlock those things, which is a beautiful journey to see for a young kid, to sort of have one of those adventures, to explore possibility and all these things and journey away from home. It's a beautiful coming of age story, and those generally resonate with me, but this one in particular just hit all the right notes in the right ways. So yeah, I love my boy Luca.
And I want to pause here while we're talking about characters to also give Alberto some love, because they write him in a way that like he does demonstrate these kind of annoying qualities, or like these frustrating moments where he gets jealous of the budding friendship between Luca and Julia. And he gets a little fussy, and he gets upset by certain things, but I think that they do this really beautiful arc of showing, rather than having to tell you, so they do it really well, of showing you that he's grappling with abandonment, right?
Mhm.
And looking for accompaniment and a parent figure in Julia's father, and family in Luca. And I just thought they did that really beautifully. And that brings in, we all also took a look at the short.
Yeah, Ciao Alberto.
And they continue that journey for him there, which I really enjoyed. I thought they did that really, really well. So I do feel like he, as a character, like he has some of the moments that were more cringy. So it's easy to be like, oh, he's kind of like, he kind of rubs you the wrong way in certain moments. But I thought they did his character really, really, really well.
Definitely agree. The overarching story,
He's a brave kid, man, just out here. Sorry, go ahead, Carlos.
No. Yeah, no, definitely agree. His journey. Then when Luca comes back after their fight and he sees the countdown that stops, like he's like, oh, I stopped counting after a certain point after dad left. It's like your heart breaks for him. And definitely with the Ciao Alberto short, you sort of see the continuation of that journey that ends. He's like, oh, the dad needs me, so I'm gonna hang out with the dad. It's like, does the dad need you or do you need the dad? And I mean, probably a little column A, a little column B, because he only gets Julia during the summer. I imagine he would enjoy having another kid, now his adoptive son, in Alberto. But yeah, no, he is fully redeemed in my eyes by the end of the movie. The sacrifice that he makes of his best friend to send him to
that's a
school.
boss move. He's like, you know what? I'm going to stay here. And of course, it's perfect. It's like, oh, it's like he's learned to be somewhat vulnerable, but he's still doing the thing where he's like, you know what? The guy needs me, so I'm just gonna stay here. And it's like, it's written in a way that like everybody can see through it, that like has this opportunity to be there and have a parent like figure, and that's picked up on in this short. But yeah, like, Luca's over here to a certain extent just gliding by. He's got his parents, got everybody in his corner, just getting what he wants. But no, jokes aside.
So Carmela's got some resentment for Luca.
I like Luca, but yeah, I just wanted to give Alberto some love because I feel like, it's easy to not.
Yeah, no, I feel you. So I found the quote. Some people, they'll never accept him, but some will. And he seems to know how to find the good ones. That was the grandma's line.
Thank you for the dramatic reading of that.
It's a powerful line. And I think that that's a good sort of pivot, even though it's a little late from when we first brought up the quote. But I think that sort of puts the cap on the sort of queer reading of Luca, the film, where as sea monsters, they're the other, they're the outsider, which can be literally anybody. Any group can sort of plug themselves in. But there's a particular way for me and for a lot of queer folks that watching Luca with the metaphor of the transition, transforming, revealing oneself, outing oneself, being nervous about being accepted. There's so many different layers that the film projects. And then the relationship between Luca and Alberto, for me, some of Alberto's jealousy towards Julia is sort of that, not necessarily healthy, but that first crush jealousy where it's like, no, this is my friend. You can't have my friend. You can't steal my friend. Especially when it's like a girl who's coming in and trying to steal your guy friend, which may or may not resonate with other people. Not asking everyone to agree with that sort of perspective, but that quote from the grandma at the end really sort of put the cap on it, where you're not going to be accepted everywhere. There are lots of people who are not going to like you because of who you are. And that's sort of a Disney motif that comes around every so often. But given the queer reading for Luca that a lot of people have, it's like, yeah, a lot of people are not going to like your queerness. They're not going to accept you for who you are. But hopefully with the luck that Luca has had, he'll find the good ones, the people who will care for him and love him the dad accepts his now adoptive son as a sea monster that he's been hunting and wanting dead for all of his adult life, perhaps. And then immediately, which is probably not realistic, a lot of parents don't come around at the snap of a finger to their kid's queerness, but he does, because Luca and Alberto are just that lucky to find their people. So that really sort of hit for me, sort of that reading of Luca.
Yeah, I thought that reading came through really clearly as well. And in a complete way, almost from start to finish of the film, rather than there being like one little moment that could be read with kind of a queer reading lens. And it does surprise me, Carlos, you sent an article to us saying that the director said that that was not necessarily the intention, which to me, it was kind of such a present theme that it does surprise me that that wasn't the intention behind it, but maybe that's what made it read so organically. I don't know. But I also would add the moment that we referenced a few minutes ago when Alberto exposes himself as a sea monster and he looks to Luca to like basically join him in solidarity or to join him and say like, yeah, we are sea monsters. And Luca instead projects onto Alberto and denies his own identity, right? His own being. And I felt that was something that I feel like resonates as well with the queer lens. Just, so I thought it was really, I thought that was definitely, their relationship is the heart of the film. And even though Julie is a fun character and she's part of it as well, really thought the back and forth between them was really powerful and like the heart of the film and them discovering each other. And I know the director said, well, they're supposed to be kind of young and it's like before you're thinking about that. But I feel like the way they interact makes sense in that way as like the proceedings of queer romantic feelings for each other, or I don't know, maybe one-sided, maybe not, but I thought it was great.
Because didn't the director say that it was actually based off of him and his friendship with his childhood friend Alberto? So why it wasn't for him like queer coded, because he's like, well, we're not. So, but he was like pretty receptive to it. He was like, but I think that's the beautiful thing about art is that you create it with one thing in mind, and other people who you didn't expect really see themselves in that. And and he said he's like, it's great, and that's just the beauty of how creativity works. You can kind of just write it for one audience and be surprised how many others really, really identify with it.
I love that, Omar, because I do think we sometimes forget that, right? When we want to see the story that we want to see in the way that we see it, regardless of the topic, right? But clearly and Carlos, you said this too, but like the theme is clearly about like fully embracing yourself and managing being different, however that manifests, and finding your people within that and banding together with your people to like get through all the shittiness of life. So
yeah, no, and it's really interesting because in that piece when Enrico Casarosa is talking about sort of it being based on his friendship and him and his friend sort of being losers and sort of being outcasts in a particular kind of nerdy way, like that translates in this, where unlike his relationship with his Alberto, there's a lot more touchy-feely, there's a bit more sort of proximity and emotional closeness that's represented in the film, which I think just adds to that sort of Disney piece, that storytelling piece where, yeah, once you create something and release it into the world, people are gonna read it in these different ways. The only thing that sort of bothers me about being pre-romance is like, sometimes we use that sort of language and it's like, oh yeah, we can't be queer until we're grown, but like straight kids can be straight all the time. So I do think friendship stories are important, having deep friendships, platonic friendships, super important. But I think it's also important to have queer friendships that blossom into queer relationships, especially for this generation that's growing up in a world that's a bit more open to queerness, a bit, compared to when we were kids, and Luca having any sort of queer anything would have been like, no, this isn't. We don't talk about Bruno. We silencio Bruno.
So always trying to shut up Bruno, man. They're like, Bruno, hush.
Do you think this movie would not have been able to have been made in when we were kids?
I think certain parts might have been tweaked, because I know a lot of people compare this to The Little Mermaid, because the similar story, sea person wants to be a land person, is sort of really drawn in by land people culture, leaves behind their world to enter into something else. And there are people who have read The Little Mermaid in sort of queer ways, sort of done queer readings of The Little Mermaid as a sort of trans narrative, because Ariel literally transitions into a different person to be in a new world. She wants to be somewhere else, be part of your world.
She translated for the day.
Okay, I am not going to have Ariel slander on this podcast.
They were like, no, because someone was like trying to be like, who's better, like Moana or Ariel? And they were like, don't you dare have any disrespect for Moana of Motunui when Ariel just like wanted to get some legs so that she can get this air.
No. I've seen that meme, but it is a misreading of Ariel's story. She wants to be part of that world. She wants to be with the humans. Eric is just the route to get there, because she wanted to be human before that. And it's like, hey, this guy's cute. He's my ticket in.
Okay.
I think great combo. No, seriously. I think it's not so much that this movie couldn't have been made. Like, I think the theme of like the friendship theme and the theme of like coming of age through friendship, whether with romantic undertones or not, is pretty like, it's a pretty common theme in Pixar movies and in earlier movies. But I just think it wasn't being made, like in the sense that Disney movies, pre-Pixar, the movies that were being made were typically had like a princess, right? And a like usually weirdly problematic romance, heteronormative romance. I mean, Ariel gets her voice taken away when she goes on land to like pursue the guy, and he's just like, that's fine. You don't need that.
You don't need to talk.
Snow White's pretty much dead.
So I don't know if they would have
comb your hair with the fork. That's cool.
So yeah, what's up? But I think they're moving away from that, obviously, like moving away from the Disney princess. It's still a huge part of their brand, but they're slowly moving away from it with the questions about like whether certain characters count as like a Disney princess, right? And then Pixar kind of came through and has had a different type of focus in their storytelling. I just don't know if it would have gotten through as something that made it to production when we were really young. Maybe like in the Toy Story era, you know, if it might have gotten through.
Yeah, because I think with the Disney Renaissance, that's when things really shifted. So you had Aladdin, The Little Mermaid, I think Beauty and the Beast is part of that, where
just nothing but hits.
Where it sort of began to pivot somewhat, where the characters like Belle and Ariel versus like Snow White and Cinderella and Princess Aurora, they have backstory, they have lives, they have personality. And so I think you're right that maybe in our earlier years, but not like our earliest youth. And who knows, they might have tried to force in a romantic subplot, because lots of kids movies just throw in, it's like, oh, boy, girl must kiss. And it's like, or not, we don't have to do that.
Speaking of, sorry, Carlos,
no,
I just also wanted to say last episode when we were talking about Encanto, and I think about it with this movie as well, and now that we're talking through all the Disney princess movies, I am like, I want and would like more movies, this is gonna sound wild, with more of these animated movies with like boy and young man protagonists, because the Disney princess model was so pervasive for a long time. And I just think the reason I say that is not because I'm like, who will think of the men?
What? Who will think about us? We are so important. We are underrepresented.
But it's just because like these films.
I just want to say that there are no male Disney princesses, and that is.
I know. These movies, albeit problematic in hindsight, some of them from the earlier years, obviously, like they're mostly about they're like mostly attempt to be kind of these like wholesome stories about like overcoming obstacles or growing through friendship, or it's okay to be different. And I feel like when we only have it's only like the girl characters that are going through that, then young boys have nowhere to turn except to like other stuff like G.I. Joe and like Avengers. And I'm a big Avengers fan, but it's just a different type of narrative.
I had him growing up. I was like, I'm gonna be a street rat.
That's true. There was Aladdin, and Jasmine basically did nothing active in that movie.
Although she did have a dope line. What was it like? My heart is not a prize to be won.
Yes.
Like, oh.
Talk about my line read. That line read. Yeah. That was beautiful.
That's true.
No, but I do get what you're saying. Like in a sense of like, it's actually really cool to see. Like I remember there was like, it was a big deal when Merida didn't have a love interest. Yeah. Like there was like the first Disney princess. And then, so it's a dope shift. And yeah, I get what you're saying about having like movies also that, don't necessarily fit the Disney princess model. But
yeah,
no, definitely need more. I know that I think with Rapunzel, when they did Tangled, they like made it a concerted effort to build up Flynn Rider's character and sort of give him more to do, because the princes in previous works, like besides Aladdin, were just like there, and maybe they fought a dragon, maybe they did something cool, but they largely were very flat, two-dimensional, almost the same flatness as the princesses. But here they've got like personality and can do stuff. Yeah, definitely more. More is good.
Philip, basically his only job was to like sexually molest Aurora while she's sleeping, and then to be like, "Aw."
Yep. I mean, the fact that you remember his name off the top is pretty impressive.
No, I had to do a research for a project, and that's why. But no, I believe me. I don't even think I fully watched that movie because it's just like, I actually don't think I have watched it. Not that I plan to. I mean, isn't she just sleeping most of the time?
Yeah, no, I think she's the least active of all of the, or maybe her and Snow White are tied, like for doing the least amount in their runtime. Like
I'm pretty sure Snow White did a whole lot more than Sleeping Beauty. I mean, she was around dancing with the dwarves and talking to animals.
Yeah, so I think it might be
Cinderella. No. That was
Aurora, Snow White, and then everybody else.
So back to Luca. We went on a Disney binge.
Yes, because this is the conversation where we talk about media. All of these things are interconnected. There's stories, there's the Disney corporate of it all, there's the Pixar corporate of it all. That's sort of part of the story. But I do think a lot of people seem to be not a super fan of Luca. They're like, oh, Pixar's sort of losing its touch. Because I think unlike some of the other Pixar movies that are designed to like give you a 1-2 gut punch to make you cry or make you feel something, I feel like Luca doesn't have that same formula. It sort of taps into some genuine feels. It feels like it's an earned emotional response if you have one. Unlike like the Toy Story 3 of it all, when they're in the Inferno, it's like, oh, you're trying to make me cry. But then there's the scene with Andy giving Bonnie the toys, and I'm like, perfect end to a perfect trilogy. I haven't seen part 4, and I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist.
I haven't even seen part 3.
I don't know.
Shut up.
We're making faces at Omar.
I don't know. I think I've seen it, but I don't remember it well. So you can make faces at me too. Maybe we'll have to do a Toy Story.
Maybe not.
Anyway, crap, I was just gonna bring something up that was related to what we were just saying.
Emotions, gut punch, Pixar
Oh,
formula.
Carlos, is that true that people didn't like Luca?
I read an article. It's not like super deep dive, but compared to other Pixar stuff, it doesn't
Well,
seem to
people
have the
are
same
weird about
spark.
Toy Story. Sorry. It's probably exclusively Pixar fans listening to this episode. But I do feel people love their Toy Story. But I feel like Luca was pretty popular, and like the Rotten Tomatoes scores are pretty high. What was not so good was that the other one they made right around then with they were like in a fairy tale creatures.
Oh, Onward.
Onward, yeah, that was.
Oh, I love that one.
Oh boy.
That was like one of the. I remember seeing it in the movie theater, and it was we meant to go see it like an action film, but it was out, so I was like, all right, Onward, and it was actually really good.
That's another one that it's sort of like a boy lead character, him and his brother, sort of having this journey, trying to save their father. If you haven't seen it, listeners. But yeah, so those two movies, some folks, at least in certain areas of the internet, are like Pixar's losing its touch. They don't have the same magic that they did with some of their earlier stuff, which is clearly debatable. Omar loved Onward. I clearly love Luca. They're doing good work.
We all love Luca, Carlos.
Well, I didn't want to overspeak and be like, oh, we all love Luca, and then be like, well, actually, I think Luca sucks. I'm just trying to speak for myself and own my language.
I'd say I'm firmly in the love Luca category. So what have we not talked about yet about the film?
I mean, we touched on the sort of queer reading. So did we have any final thoughts about Luca? Anything that we haven't talked about that folks want to address, want to discuss?
Yeah, I want to talk about the Italy thing for a minute, even though I referenced it at the beginning. First time I watched it, I thought it was kind of felt that it was both like hyper stereotypical and a little bit thin, by which I just mean like it doesn't seem to have like the depth behind it, and like maybe it was a little bit of a smaller film than some other things as well, which I think matters. But the second time I noticed more details, and I do think they still kind of lean into it really, really strongly. They're like, it's a triathlon, it's an Italian triathlon. So like one of the events is eating pasta. Like, you guys, come on. So choices were made, decisions were made. I do think it was really beautifully portrayed, and like the area. So one thing that I wanted to think about though is like, one thing that bothered me when I watched it, I think the area portrayed was really beautiful, the animation, like Omar said, and it's a particular area of Italy called the Cinque Terre, which is in northwest Italy by Genoa, and it's really beautiful. The one thing that slightly bothers me, not about this film, but just in general about films that show Italy or Italian America, is that they rely on the tropes that audiences are already familiar with. So this to me fell into that same vein of like, when you go to a setting that's meant to be Italy, especially through, I know the director is from there, which is, is something. But when you go to a setting that's meant to be Italy, it's this like, it's old timey, and obviously the film is meant to take place in the past, but it's old timey, it's picturesque, it's life is simpler. And it just feels like anytime we portray Italy, it's these like Northern Italian, old school, we're in the past, everything is picturesque towns. And anytime you portray Italian America, it's like either like crime and mafia or like peasants. And the thing about that is like some of that reflects true experiences of Italians and Italian Americans, and some of that reflects the demographics of who actually moved to the US from Italy. But it also reinforces like an actually existing power divide in Italy between the wealthy northern region and the poor southern region. So I think it's just an interesting thing to be cognizant of, because this film sort of like I said about Encanto, like they say it's Colombia, but it doesn't, and it's part of the story, but it's not like the only part of the story. The same is true with this, right? Like this is really about those relationships, and it could be Greece, right? Like it could be Croatia, it could be Spain, anywhere that has like a port area or a beautiful coastline. But it's Italy, and they therefore rely on the tropes that audiences are really familiar with. And when you see contemporary Italian film that portrays Southern Italian areas and cities like Naples, it's totally different, right, than what we would see here, which again, I think is totally fine. I mean, this is beautiful representation for that area, but it's also the collective US imagination of what Italy is and what Italian Americans are is really limited to these two very different slices of those two experiences. So it's just something I think about sometimes. And I don't think it's like an equity issue at all, because Italians have become a relatively powerful group. But I do think when we think about Italian American media specifically, the damage that has been done, even in the hands of Italian American directors, and like perhaps most particularly in the hands of Italian American directors, is pretty significant. Like when we think about, if I asked you to think of Italian American film and television that comes to mind, like I'm not even gonna make you do it, but it's like The Godfather, Goodfellas, The Sopranos, all hyper masculine, super violent, crime and mafia based stories. There's almost nothing where Italian American women have like any role at all ever, with a slight exception for like Spike Lee films, which is, and he's portraying, Italian racism and, clashes and conflicts between communities in a different way. But that has been something that has wound up shaping generations of identity for Italian American men, and how they see themselves and who they are and what they should care about. And it also perceptions of what Italian Americans are. So it's just something I'm always cognizant of. I know I'm like a little bit off the island right now and not talking about Luca anymore, but just like, since this is, a film that has to do
I think Italy, that's right on.
I was thinking about it a lot.
We're talking about the larger context of this film that sort of fits one of the slices of Italian American life that you're talking about, because it is set in this old picturesque area. A lot of the posters in the background for movies are like old Hollywood, so it's like, or Audrey Hepburn's Roman Holiday is a poster there. And then to just underscore your point, there's a new show or a miniseries coming out called The Offer, which is about the making of The Godfather and how it was problematic in the Italian American community. And it was just a lot of back and forth and a lot of tension in the making of that production that then went on to be one of the classic American films, one of the classic Italian American stories that then paved the way for Goodfellas and all of these other types of stories. So I think that this is the perfect place for us to talk about it, because this is not doing a necessary negative portrayal, but it is sort of tapping into some of those same erasures of a good chunk of Italian American history and possibility for storytelling.
I think like when we think about The Godfather, which I would say is like one of my favorite films as well, like I just like, I don't really have favorite films, but like that it's been, it's been really large. And some of what I feel like people really resonate with when they watch that is like the in-between scenes that portray like the wedding scenes, or just like the cultural stuff that's in the background. And even though it's like wildly overdone in some places, I feel like that's what people get so excited about when they watch that. Or like, that's what I feel like Italian Americans or people with Italian ancestry sometimes see themselves there in a way that is not clear elsewhere. But I also feel like Hollywood at the time leveraged the idea that we're going to have, and this is why I think it's important when we talk about and think about representation, that like the stories themselves are important as well as the identities of people who make them. Because I feel like if a non-Italian person made The Godfather, it would be, people would have been like, this is garbage, I mean, I'm sure it would have been a very different film anyway, but I feel like Hollywood leveraged the idea of like, we're going to get an Italian American director guy, and we're going to have to make this film, and then it's okay for this to be kind of like exclusively the portrayal that's put out into the world. And again, I just want to emphasize, it's not only about how non-Italians see Italians, it's also about the role that these films have played in 3 or 4 generations of Italian American identity, as Italian Americans have assimilated into whiteness and then held on to these films as a way of connecting with their and our culture or pieces of it, and what is selected to be the things that we hold on to. And I've really like observed the way that, and again, especially for, I think, boys and men, about a version of masculinity that's acceptable, and to perform that version of masculinity is to be authentically Italian American, when like there were always other stories available to be told. So that's my 25 cents.
Carmela is available to culturally consult on all issues in and American related.
Oh, me, what's up?
Pivoting off of that, like just thinking about the portrayal of masculinity and boyhood in Luca, I think that the director talking about his childhood experience, how him and his friend weren't this touchy-feely, but then you have these 2 little boys that are very touchy-feely, that they are sort of wrapping their arms around each other in ways that it's not normal in a lot of mainstream American culture. Like, we are not touchy-feely in that way. Like, if we're playing football, we'll tackle each other, we'll like beat each other up, we'll wrestle, but we don't do sort of intimate platonic touch like that in the US. And so I think that this is a really good portrayal of alternatives, ways friendships can be in a different system outside of the patriarchy, perhaps. Things can be different in male friendships, which we need more. We need stories about male friendships that are more like this. I also want to pivot a little. It's not the same thing.
We want to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, jump in.
No, because that was actually a very important part, because I grew up here in the States, so I'm very aware of, American expectations of like boys growing up, but I also have a very significant part of my formative years was spent like going back and forth to Egypt, where we have very different codes of interactions, where it actually allows for a more, and I don't like to use the word intimate because I feel like that as a term has been sexualized, but
yeah, it's got a certain connotation.
Right, but the way that Luca and Alberto, because you were saying, like the touchy-feely, that's completely standard outside. I would even say outside of the US, like in a lot of countries, like that, people. That's why I like in one of the articles that you sent us, they were saying like, oh, they're so touchy-feely, which makes it queer coded. I was like, I'm not sure if I agree with that exact part of it, because that touchy-feely is just non-American. It's I feel like in America, in the US specifically, I should actually make sure to make that just in the US, like it's almost like you can't show any kind of affection because it'll be between the same gender, because it'll be taken as somehow homoerotic, where it's just like, but you understand in other countries there's not that, in a sense, that concern, and like, for example, like you will see grown men in Egypt walking arm in arm, like linking elbows, or like physical touch isn't sexualized so much, so it allows for a more like intimate physical interaction that doesn't necessarily become, or isn't necessarily seen as sexualized. So I think that's a very important aspect, that it shows that you can be touchy-feely, and that's just how friends are,
Yeah, for sure. Because you see a little bit of that with Luca and Julia, when he's sort of getting excited about all of the things that he's showing her. So yeah, like you can have this, and I think it's definitely a US masculinity thing that sort of this film is buttressing against. I can't speak to other cultural contexts in the same way, but that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
What did you want to pivot to? Sorry.
Yeah, no. So the other thing, Mela, you were talking about how had a non-Italian American directed The Godfather would have portrayed the story a little different. When we talk about queer representation, there's a lot of subtext, a lot of mainstream films like, oh, if you squint, this character is queer, this character is gay. There's the subtext that's happening. I'd like to see more explicit text happening. I think we need more, like, this director is a straight man, created this based on his childhood friendship. I'd like to see queer creators creating these stories and talking about their first crushes and their blossoming into their sexuality. So it's not just coming out stories. Like, I want happy gay stories because there's so many tragedies and so many sad stories. It's like, let's get in the director's chair, let's get in the writer's seat and tell all of these other stories, and Hollywood, make our shit, make our movies, like, release them, give us the budget. Like, these stories deserve to be told, and more people have more stories to tell. Let's let them make stories. Let's let people make stories. Yeah, I want more. I want explicitly queer characters having queer crushes and queer love. I want platonic hugging and cuddling. I want all of the things.
So Disney, Carlos is available for hire as a director. See, I'm just trying to get both of y'all paid.
I mean, Omar is also available for consulting work and is available for writing as well. So call us.
Call us all.
So any other final thoughts before we go into our hype stars today?
Oh, last thing, real quick. I did appreciate like the different variety of how people looked in the film.
Yeah.
The different kind of hair and skin
point.
tones a little bit different. Even though Julia's hair was unrealistically tomato red, I actually loved it on the second watch. So that the curls were on point. And just they really seem to take the time to make people big and small and short and tall and have like slightly different tones and textures of hair, and that was nice. And even when they were sea monsters, they had different colors a little bit, and that was cool. I enjoyed that.
I like the old lady couple coming out of sea monsters at the end after Alberto and Luca.
That was dope, and like also a queer, like I feel like a queer storyline. Like I'm like, you guys gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, that to me was like the direct, like the very clear kind of queer coded part. Yeah. You know, I think like Alberto and Luca, like I definitely see it, but I think that one with the two of them was like very clear. They're like,
yeah, they're always together. They live together. There's a quick scene. They have a bunch of cats
that like, she's been living with for 40 years.
Yes, exactly. It's like, oh, her and her friend, her roommate. So I thought that was beautiful that after these kids were outed against their will, they're like, okay, now's the time for us to come out. And I think that helps some of the other people in town just be like, oh, well, they've been living here for however long and they're fine. So clearly, like, the old lady looks at them and then rips up the wanted poster. It's like, yeah, these are our people, and creates a scene of belonging. I loved it. So that brings us to our hype stars. How many hype stars do we give Luca 2021 from Disney and Pixar?
I'm going to say 4. I thought it was really good. I don't think it transcended to the heights of like an Encanto, but it was a great film.
I was going to say the same for me, 4. Although visuals is a 5, 6, but yeah, the whole thing. 4.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and give it 5 hype stars. I think it speaks to me being a little Luca looking for an Alberto to sort of explore the wilds with, ride on a Vespa with, explore the world, run away. It just hits. It hits. The daddy issue story, sub B plot with Alberto sort of finding healthy father figure relationships. It just overall it just hit all of the notes for me and earns its tears at the end with the hand holding trade scene, which just every time, man, every time. Whew.
Carlos is just a Luca looking for his Alberto.
So if
Love
you're
it.
single, I'm
You're-
Carlos
So-
Creates 2018 on Instagram.
I was gonna say, if you're an Alberto looking for your Luca, contact Carlos.
Link is in the episode notes.
Yes, check us out. All right, everybody, that is our episode. Thanks for tuning in to Play.Hype.Dialogue. You can find us on Instagram at Play.Hype.Dialogue. You can check out this episode where you're listening to it now on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a good one.